All right guys, welcome back to the shop. This week I'm gonna show you how I made these custom cornhole boards. I used a set of plans that I found free online, which I will link in the description. But what I did was made them fully customizable for my customer and thus brought in a little extra money. So I'm gonna show you how I did it. Let's get right to it. For these boards, I picked up some 3/4 inch pine plywood. This is AC, so it's sanded on one side, so it looks really nice on one side, which you can see. And the reason I went with this style plywood is it's gonna have a thicker veneer. When I inlay these and fill that inlay with epoxy, I'm gonna need some buffer room for sanding. So I'm gonna be careful not to sand through this veneer, but this definitely gives me a little more leeway as compared to like maple or birch plywood. I'm gonna rip this down into 48 inch by 24 inch rectangles with my track saw. You could do this with just a regular skill saw and a straight edge if you want to, but this is the official dimensions of a cornhole set or cornhole board. After that, I'm just gonna hit it with some 120 grit on my sander. You know, these things have a little bit of fuzz to them, so I just want to take it down to a nice smooth surface. And then I'm going to hit it with just a single coat of shellac. And I'll explain this, but this is basically just so my epoxy doesn't bleed into the pine board itself. And while those dry, I'm gonna head over to the miter saw and start cutting up my 1x4 clear pine for the outside edge, or kind of the frame that these boards sit on. This is what gives them their thickness, and I basically just pick whichever side is best, face it away from me, and then drill pocket holes on the other side, and that's what's going to attach it to the top side board itself. You could always drill through the board into this frame, but I like the idea of having no hardware showing. I think it just looks a lot cleaner, and you know, I've got all the tools for it, so I might as well. I hit the shellac with some 400 grit, so now it's just like glassy smooth, and the epoxy shouldn't stick to it. So yeah, time to move on to the engraving. Got my machine set up. You know, the trickiest part about this is these cornhole boards are 24 by 48 inches, and that's exactly the cutting area of my CNC machine. So my hope is this will go smoothly. I've got like a 1 inch tolerance on each side, so I'm not super worried about it. On your CNC machine, you have spoil boards, which is this piece of wood underneath that the bit kind of cuts into. And I've surfaced that with this machine, so I know, all right, cool. I know it can cut all the way around the perimeter of this spoil board, and this cornhole board top fits within those limits, so I should be just fine. I'm just gonna square this up, find my center, and hit the go button. All right, so this is really cool, and having a CNC machine is great, but if you didn't have one of these, I've seen really good results with people just painting these and then ordering vinyl stickers in the design they want and then slapping those on there. Sweet. Oh, I gotta undo this. Just a quick sand to get rid of some of the, I just call it fuzz, you know. It's just like a tear out almost. All right, on to, so I'm just gonna hit this with another coat of shellac because I gotta seal up all the edges where the engraving happened, right? So that's gonna make sure our epoxy doesn't bleed. I love shellac. It dries quick, it sands really nice. I think, you know, my top coat of this is gonna be spar urethane, just so it's like, be out in the elements, right? When you're partying and playing cornhole. But, you know, for this purpose, shellac is gonna work perfect as a base coat. I'll likely sand most of this off once I pour the epoxy. After I pour the epoxy, because I gotta sand everything flush. You'll see. Okay. Let this dry, and I'll go mix up some epoxy. The epoxy I'm using here is called liquid glass, and this is actually some leftover stuff I had from a deeper pour. So I don't know that I'd recommend this particular one. This is for like 3-inch tabletops, but I would have used probably just something that cured in 24 hours, if I had to do this again. But basically what you see me do here is I added some black mica powder to give it its tint, and I actually added about 12 drops of an alcohol dye that's meant for epoxy. Once it's all mixed up, I essentially just flood coat all of the grooves that the engraving made, or the CNC machine made, and you can see it kind of flooding into the cracks and crevices. The other thing about this epoxy is I feel like it shrinks a little bit. I don't know if that's just like a general thing when it comes to epoxy, but I had to actually go back once you see it done here, but I had to go back and just hit it with like a little bit extra so it was all flush. But yeah, overall really happy with the results here. All right, so I just did the other matching board to this, and I've got lots of epoxy in there, so it filled the gaps real well, but this stuff is a bear to get off. What you'll see from the time lapse is this thing becomes my friend. This stuff, thankfully this epoxy, honestly I don't think I let it cure enough, but it's got to come off anyway. When I just run my plane across it, kind of comes off like butter. And I mean, I should probably dial this thing in and maybe sharpen it, but time is money, right? So step one is just carving this stuff off with a plane. Imagine how long it'd take you to just sand that. And then I was using my fancy Rotex sander from Festool, but the thing was gumming up like crazy with these small pads. So then I just resorted back to my, I think it was like my first ever random orbital, and that seems to take care of the rest. So yeah, I'm just gonna block plane and then hit it with the 80 grit sandpaper. Once I've got it flush, once I have the epoxy flush with the wood, then I'll come back with like some 120 and just smooth everything out. So, take away some of those aggressive scratch marks from the 80 grit. But yeah, it's time consuming. The first one probably took me an hour. So hopefully I can make this one a little bit smoother. A little bit quicker. I'm realizing I didn't totally explain what I'm up to here, but the idea is that you flood these gaps and flood this design with epoxy, black in my case, and then it brings it to the same surface level as the plywood, and then you basically have to eliminate everything that is not level with the veneer. The advantage of this is the entire surface is on one plane. So, I had mentioned stickers, and that's great, but with this design, you can actually, the cornhole bags just skim right along the surface of the board because, well, everything's totally flat. So, yeah, this is like definitely the superior way to do it, but as you can see, it's very, very time consuming. I'd love to tell you I went back in time here and I'm showing you me cut out the rest of those frame pieces, but the truth is I accidentally shorted myself a couple boards. When I was doing the math in my head, I figured it would take 3 8-foot 1x4s out of this clear pine, but in reality I ended up needing 4, so here I am just buzzing back to the miter saw to cut out those extra pieces. So I should have all my parts cut out. Oh, except for the legs. We've not done the legs yet because I want to make sure I've got enough 1x4. The little flip down legs. That'll probably be the last thing we do. But so for these guys, this is basically, hold on, let me grab my board here. These things came out real nice. They took me forever. The end result's just like real smooth. There's a couple pockets that I can fill later on, but overall I'm real happy with the quality of this. But anyway, so these things, we'll flip this over. This is just going to make a border. Now, of course, I got my pocket holes, which you saw me drill. And you could drill through the top of this, I think. I don't know that it would really matter. Just kind of whatever you want it to look like. But yeah, we'll drill down through there with our pocket holes, create the border. And then you can see I've drilled some pocket holes on the ends because these are gonna screw into the side pieces, which you'll see. And then after that, I've got to drill the hole, like the actual cornhole. I shouldn't say drill, route the actual cornhole, which I've got a jig that my dad made. We're gonna see, it's apparently like the official dimensions. We'll double check it. But we're gonna use that jig with a router. Anyway, let's screw this up. This jig my dad made, it's a 6-inch circle, right, for a cornhole board, and I think it's 9 inches from the
top plate and 12 inches from the side. So you could effectively just mark center, use a string line or some kind of hole drilling device to do that. This jig, I would have just made this, but he had already made it. This is gonna be, it's gonna make things very easy and consistent. So, bam, that's where your circle goes. So that's pretty slick. The only question I would have is, so this is 6 1/4. So I've just got to figure out what size bit and bushing to use on this. If you only have, you know, one option, make your jig according to that. I'll figure out what that is and we'll burn that out, and that's going to be just perfect.
One thing I like to do before sanding is just hit all the edges with an 1/8 inch round over. And then once everything's sanded up to 180, I'll go ahead and hit it with 3 more coats of shellac. And I remember I said I was gonna do spar urethane for the top coat, but scratch that. It's just gonna be all shellac.
Right, so we're on to the last part of this. Here's, again, another template I borrowed, and this is for the legs. So the last thing we have to do now that everything is screwed together and has 3 coats of shellac on it, the one thing I haven't made yet is the legs, obviously. So pretty simple. It's basically, I don't even know how long this is. It doesn't really, well, it does matter, I guess, if you don't have the dimensions. Yeah, this is 1 foot long. I measured this angle. It's like 26.5 degrees. And then you've got a 3.5 inch circle with a hole in the middle, the profile cut out. This says 3/8 space to the top of the 2x4. That's just a note, which I will explain once we install this. But yeah, this is the basic shape of it. So that kind of just, I mean, if you guys have seen cornhole boards before, but they just bolt in there and then they slip out. And this tends to be a pretty darn good angle and it's pretty attractive. It'll make more sense once we put it together, but first let's just press out 4 of these legs for our cornhole boards. And then we actually have to run to the store to get some hardware, which I kind of forgot we needed. So yeah, onto the legs. All right, I don't think I mentioned it, but these legs are coming out of the same 1x4 material that we used for the whole shebang, for that whole frame. Guess I got to get better about using terms that actually exist. All right, last part of this, folks. So my legs, those are all dry. 3 coats of shellac, sanding in between, just like the boards. 2, 3, 4. So now what we need to do is just drill the holes in the board to accept those legs, and then check out what I've got for hardware here. This is what's going to attach the leg to the board itself, and I'm going to go through this once more when I actually attach them, but I like to use 1/4 inch lag bolt, 2.5 inches. I've got a couple of like polyurethane washers here, so nothing binds. A regular flat washer, and then I like to attach them with wing nuts. So if you want to, and I'll show this once they're all put together, you can tighten them down and then the legs will stay closed in the cornhole board itself. That just makes it easier to transport without those things flopping off. And you can also just kind of adjust how tight you want those. So let's get a board up here and let's drill a couple holes. The legs are gonna drop in right here at the top. And remember, I need, according to my template, a 3/8 gap between the board and this back section here. So I'll measure that, mark it, mark where my hole goes, and then I'll probably drill from the inside out with a board on the outside to catch, to make sure we don't have any tear out. right, so remember, lag bolt, couple polyurethane washers, flat washer, wing nut. These are pretty tight holes, so it takes a little bit. Yeah, that's not bad actually. So bolt comes through, plastic washer, the leg itself. Now make sure this is angled in this orientation, so when it's flipped up, it's flat. If you go like this, it turns into like a little spike. Another plastic guy, flat washer, wing nut. So I'll crank this right down to set that lag bolt. The reason we use lag bolts is because it has a little square piece that acts like, I don't know, kind of a nut on the other end. And then I'll back it off like a quarter turn. Boom. The reason I like to use lag bolts is, check it out. That's just like super clean, right? I have to run my bit through this one more time. I think when I put lacquer on these, it kind of swelled a little. Just don't want them to be too tight. That's better. Plastic bushing, flat washer, hi Lucy, wing nut. Cinch it down, set the lag bolt, back it off, got a leg. Perfect, there we go. Let's bring these outside and see what they look like. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this build. This was a fun one for me. It's a little time consuming. The next set I make will probably go a lot faster, having learned what I did. I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, if you're not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button, like the video if you liked it, share it with your friends, all that good stuff. Yeah, I might make myself a set of these. We'll see. Anyway, thanks for stopping by. See you next week.